Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of DC Stargirl. A great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, that intro was very, interesting. I was like, okay, is this set decades ago? And at first you're kind of like, where is this going? And then there's that girl, Rebecca, and that creepy little boy, Bruce. The moment he popped up, I was like, okay, you super creepy kid, especially because she was supposed to cross the street following him, almost got hit by a truck in the process, and he's egging her on. It's like, oh my god, those presents. You just want a doll, right? Like, I'm sure she's got plenty of presents. And you got nothing today. Go. You should steal one. I'm like, oh, this kid is creepy. I was thinking like some ghost level stuff, but I wasn't sure what to make of it. But then she sees the doll, but then it's kind of warped, and then it goes back to looking normal, and that kid looks super demonic, and then he picks up the jewel and is like, okay, so we're going full circle with what Cindy, awakened at the end of season 1. So the thing is, does it choose a host to kind of, be its human servant to a certain extent? It's any human that finds it takes upon its will. I'm curious, is that a real little boy Bruce that was taken over by this or forced to serve this thing? Which kind of begs the question, Cindy thinks she's in control, but eventually I think this thing's going to take control of her, I'm assuming. What's his name? Eclipso, I think is what someone had said previously, I believe. Because I didn't remember its name, but I think it was it was Eclipso or something like that. So I'm like, is that thing's whole deal, like I said, was that a real boy or was that some figment thing? I don't know. But then we saw the mailbox. I was like, they're making a point to point that out. And then later on, I was like, oh, that's Chuck's last name. So I'm like, was Rebecca his little sister? Because we never saw what actually happened to her. We just saw her mom walk over to that home because she's like, oh, I'm sure my daughter went to the party, and then looks and finds her daughter, I'm assuming dead. Most likely probably we don't know what it did, devoured her soul, left her in a catatonic state, or maybe just straight up soaked up her soul and just killed her. Who knows? Maybe we'll find out later on. But obviously present day we're dealing with the fact is that obviously the ISA has been defeated, but Courtney's the only one that's really on edge. She's kind of dragging Beth, Yolanda, and Rick out to do the whole superhero thing, but it's kind of we beat them. The gambler, he's a wimp. Cindy, she's run off somewhere. Grundy's on the run too. It's all good. It's all over. But Courtney's the only one that can't let go. And the reason is because for her, she, it's back to this being her destiny. The staff chose her for a reason. And when she kind of feels like everyone else is kind of abandoning the whole superhero thing, for her, she's like, no, you won't ever abandon me. And the staff's kind of agreeing I won't. And I think you can make an argument in some regard about I don't know. It's interesting because Courtney's at that point that every superhero gets to, the balancing act between living a normal life and being a superhero. There was a tiny bit of a balancing act last time, but to be fair, they had the main threat of the ISA to confront, but it's without a major threat around, the JSA is kind of just supposed to, they're kind of supposed to be quiet because there's nothing major going on in Blue Valley. So, but part of me is wondering, the staff is all about looking for a fight. I mean, maybe it senses, yes, there's still evil out there, and we might not be able to see it, but it's still there. Maybe the staff's aware of it, or it could just be the thing is the staff is no, I'm always raring for a fight. So it almost makes you feel like Courtney, who's looking for an excuse to fight or whatever, fight some evil, the staff kind of has that same, so it's almost like it feeds that addiction. Now, like I said, it could just simply be the staff's no, there's evil, I just can't really communicate to you, I don't know where it is, but I know it's out there in general. Or maybe just the staff is responding to Courtney, Courtney's desire to keep fighting crime no matter where it is and fight the evil out there. Maybe the staff is just responding. Maybe it's kind of a reflection of its host. Obviously, when she doubted herself, the staff didn't really work for her. But when she started believing in herself again, the staff did. So maybe it does reflect off of how she's feeling and what's going through her mind. But I thought it was really interesting that even though everyone else telling Courtney she needs to take it slow and everything, the other members of the JSA like are struggling with their own things. Yolanda, for one, is dealing with the aftermath of everything. I think the Henry thing probably will always kind of still be there a little bit, but it's mainly what she did to Brainwave. Because who's to say he didn't leave some imprint in her mind right before he died, like some psychic imprint, like just as he died, like sent out one final psychic wave, and there's some part of him imprinted on her. Now, she's probably thinking, like, it's just a psychological trauma of, like, I killed him and struggling with, like, I did this. It's like, for her, it's like, did she do the right thing? Which Courtney's like, the fact is, I wasn't there, Yolanda, so I don't know if there was another way around it. But, of course, you deserve to be Wildcat. Like, Brainwave would have killed all of us given the chance. So, but it's still... Because that's the thing about guilt. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. It comes down to you, and Yolanda feels very guilty about it. It's like, I killed somebody. It's just like, regardless of him being a bad guy, I did that. And it's like, maybe I could have found another way. Like, the hero thing isn't to kill somebody, you know? Because I especially probably thinking about, like, well, look at Rick. Rick could have easily killed the thing responsible for killing his parents, and he let Grundy go. So, I'm sure that sticks with... Yolanda to an extent, knowing like, right, Rick, despite revenge being all he wanted, Rick didn't pull the trigger in that case. And speaking of Grundy, Rick is still keeping an eye out for Grundy, even though he's saying like, oh, Grundy's going, it's like, no, you're still searching for him, because I think he does feel bad for him, because like, right, you were just being controlled, you were a pawn, so... I'm curious, what is it, just because he legitimately does feel sorry for Grundy, that's why he's going out searching for him? Because he's kind of like a lost animal to a certain extent, you know, kind of off on the wild, just driven by instinct, because obviously he's breaking into places like feeding himself. But also Rick's dealing with the fact is that his past, he can't escape it. Yeah, he was troubled, and yeah, he wasn't the best student, you know, wasn't kind of necessarily the best person, but he was going through a lot. He was dealing with a lot, and obviously he does a really good job on a test, and the teacher calls him out because it's like, how'd you cheat? He's like, what? I studied. She's like, yeah, right. Here's the test from last year. You're going to take it in front of me. And he's just like, I saved you, and none of you will even know what I did for this city. And he's like, you want to fail me? Just fail me. Because it's like, I've actually tried my hardest. I've done my best to change and be a better person, like be better and do better. And it's like, what? My past is all that defines me. You immediately assume like, oh, I cheated in some shape or form. And it's like, you don't even know what me and the others have done for this city. You'll never know what we did for you. And it's like, at least like give me some damn gratitude, like, but not like grilling me about cheating on a test. So there's that. There's Beth trying to get Chuck back to no success. Because regardless of anything, Chuck's her best friend. Because Chuck understands her. She clicked with Chuck because when she didn't really have many other friends, Chuck is the person she had. He was the first person she really clicked with, where she understood him and it felt like, oh, he understood her. And so... especially at a time where it's like, oh, she finds out her parents are going through a divorce right now, and she even makes this dinner for them later on, trying to like, oh, spruce up the romance. But it's like, right, her mom's working late, and it's just kind of like, that's all kind of falling apart. So things are pretty rough all across the board. Obviously, you have the conversation where like Courtney and Mike are all about, nah, we got to be on this superhero thing. Barbara and Pat, no, we don't. Take a 2-week vacation. We're going to do this and that. Barbara's all about it. Mike's like, I should quit my job as a paperboy. Like, obviously take over the family legacy. Like, I need to learn how to start controlling Stripe. And Pat's like, no, you don't. So it's the thing of like both people, you know, the family is divided between the let's not do the superhero stuff, and then the other side saying, let's do the superhero stuff. Which I love that Mike and like Courtney are the ones on the same page in that regard. I think it's very befitting. But you had Pat like trying to leave Zeke in charge of the garage, and he's like, "Oh, what's behind the door?" It's like, "Oh, that's going to turn into something." And he just said, "Yeah." He's like, partners." And Pat's like, "Wait, partners?" He's like, "Yeah, well, thanks, Dugan." And I'm like, okay, that guy kind of just goes his own pace. He doesn't care about what you got to say. He's just going to do his own thing. To the point later on, he breaks in and finds Stripe. I'm like, how are you going to respond? He's like, okay. He's like, no, you don't even have to explain what it's for. Fact of the matter is, sometimes you just got to build a robot. And he's like, honestly, you should like put a flamethrower in this. And it's like, you know, because he's like, oh, I built a flamethrower with something and a BB gun put together. And it's like, you should put one in it right here. And he's like, a flamethrower? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, he's trying to give you upgrades for, give some little more arsenals to, Stripe, so that's going to be interesting. And it's like, well, I'd rather keep this secret. He's like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. It's like, once again, that guy's just going at his own pace. And it's like, cool. Didn't take long for someone just to stumble. I mean, it's like, you could have done, I guess, I don't know. It was really just hiding it in a different part of the garage behind a single locked door. I mean, at least Bruce had the, like, Batcave set up to be like, I mean, obviously it depends on, like, the different continuities, but at least, like, at least in, like, Gotham, like, the pearls, like, are a way to open up the path to the Batcave. Obviously, like, the Telltale, when it's like a chessboard piece needs to be moved and, like, a freaking button has to be pressed to get to the Batcave. It's like, it's not like Pat has access, I guess, to the most extensive security system, but come on, a locked door that it just took a dude to, like, pick to get behind, to get to Stripe. So that's a whole conversation in itself. I do like that they are setting up, obviously, the continued groundwork of, the next generation of villains, because it's like, oh, Cameron's back in town, and it's like, and Courtney's like, should I say something? Yolanda's like, no, don't. Like, if he finds out that his dad's death wasn't an accident, like, look at Henry. Henry probably be alive right now if he never found out about his dad being a villain. And it's like, that's the harsh reality of, like, that is a part of himself. Like, how will Cameron respond? We saw what happened when Henry found out the truth, and given the opportunity, he became a hero. He didn't become a villain, but, who's to say how Cameron's going to, especially because it's like, wait, you guys are responsible for my dad's death? Because granted, Henry was going that same mentality of like, oh, you're responsible for what happened to my dad. So, get the wrong person whispering in his ear, we'll get to that later on, could end up, sending him down a dark path, especially because, like, his grandparents, because, like, his grandmother was kind of like, oh, like, we should tell him about that wicked child, but his grandfather was like, nah, don't. He's smiling, like, despite all the sadnesses in his life, he's happy in this moment, so let's not take that away from him, revealing, like, who that girl really is and her responsibility. I mean, to be fair, your dad was a murderer. He murdered a lot of people, and, so, but it still doesn't change anything, because it's like, regardless of my dad being a bad guy, he was still my dad, and you're responsible for him being gone. I mean, granted, he's responsible for plenty of deaths. There's a lot of blood on his hand, and he, in his mind, he thought Icicle thought he was doing what he was doing, what he thought was for the betterment of the entire world. That whole thing, but still, then there's Artemis, who I love. Like, she had like a hockey stick and like was passing it to someone, and Courtney just like flipped and twirled her, and it's like, what the hell are you doing? She's like, you blonde pinhead or something like that. I was giving Jerome back his stick, and it's like, oh, cool. And so she got in trouble for that. And it's like, Courtney, she found her place at the school. It was, moving part way through the school year can't be easy, but found her place. But sadly, she's failing some of her classes. Courtney thought she was as on top of things as she thought she was, but she's failing like English and history. So now she's got summer school, which I'm assuming Rick's going to have summer school too, because I'm sure his teacher's going to be like, oh, you failed. I'm assuming the only person who won't is Beth. I'd be so curious if Beth would just use that as an excuse. Like, I actually don't have to technically be here. Kind of like MJ from Homecoming. It's like, wait, why are you even here? It's like, do you even know? It wasn't summer school, it was detention, but it's like, do you even have detention? Like, why are you even here? Like, what if Beth kind of does something like that? Like, oh, I want to be with my friends. Like, oh, I could use this as an extra study time. Maybe she could also use it as an excuse to be around other people without having to deal with her family's circumstances. Once again, who's to say Beth would actually do that? But I don't know. I just think it's interesting. And we don't know what Yolanda's situation is when it comes to school, but it's just that Courtney just got so focused on the superhero stuff, and it just like everything else fell to the wayside. I had skipped over it, but I love the conversation she has with Pat, because it's like, okay, so like, it's like, wait, were you up all night? And she's like, okay, Pat, I know we promised no more lies, so I'm going to tell you, yes, I was up all night. And she's looking through like the JSA files on villains. It's like, what about this villain? It's like, well, the Flash like stuck him in an alternate timeline. She's like, what does that even mean? I'm like, wait, what? Wait, but also begs the question, like, an alternate timeline, like, how does that work? I'm still not 100% sure how alternate timelines work in these continuities. Like, is this the time travel rules of that alternate timeline disappeared? So, or at the very least, it's like there's no getting, which is also like, because if you trap him in an alternate timeline, that means that alternate timeline has to be he has to be someone else's issue, wouldn't he? Because because there's not really much time traveling to an alternate timeline. I don't know. It was interesting. Like, oh, that's how he beat this villain. It's like, what about this one? Defeated by Green Lantern in '88, and but for Pat, he wants her to live her life because it's like being a superhero is one thing, but don't let it consume and be all that you are. And that, once again, that's just the typical superhero balancing act. Obviously, it's hitting Courtney at a young age because she's become a hero at a young age. And once again, I think that's what also separates this from like a lot of the other shows, because like most people in these shows who became superheroes in their 20s. She's a high schooler, so like she's the first one of the DC universe to really be of that age and being like a full-blown superhero. So it's interesting. It applies not just to her, but the entire squad. I guess I never really thought about it before, but I guess it's like this in its own right. Yes, it's the Justice Society of America, but it's almost like a live action, not a one for one, but kind of like it's its own version of Young Justice to an extent, So that's like the only other DC property, Titans, Teen Titans specifically, that, but that was never like too much of like the whole, like, they were pretty much in Teen Titans, like they're just like Titans like all the time, it was never like living life as teenagers. That never really came up, but nevertheless, but going back to the point, it's like Barbara's telling her you got to decide whether or not putting on that mask is worth risking everything else in your life. And even Pat saying, like, because at first she's even saying the line of like, who am I without Stargirl? Like, what am I supposed to do without Stargirl? It's like, yeah, how about you just pass summer school first? But that's the thing. You're not just Stargirl. You're Courtney Whitmore too. You have to remember that. Once again, it's about finding that balance. And so that's going to be, I think, a big struggle for her going forward. Other angles to this episode. You had the showdown in the in Courtney's house, which her going toe-to-toe with, as we find out later on, Green Lantern's daughter was pretty interesting. And the moment it's like she sliced the, like, door to one of, like, one of the doors in the house off, I was like, oh, that's not going to be good. Especially later on, because she blasted the counter. I'm like, and you can see Courtney kind of pausing for a minute, like, damn, I shouldn't have done that. There's just a moment during the fight, which is pretty dope. I wonder, I guess she doesn't have, Green Lantern's daughter doesn't have much practice with it, because she got off a couple shots, but it seems like she's good at hand-to-hand. I wonder, like, whether that training come into play. I mean, would that be, I wonder, did she kind of have training on her own, kind of similar to, like, Rick or something? I don't know. Like, who trained her in that regard? I wonder, does she know who Pat is or not? But it's just that thing of, like, them going toe-to-toe and Courtney having the upper hand. Like, once again, I find it so fascinating the way Courtney fights, like Stargirl fights. It's such a unique fight, so especially, like, how you use the staff. Once again, just, like, having a staff, like, pop up somewhere and have someone run in, like, smacked into it. And it's just, like, dude, like, the acrobatics off of it is so freaking sick. It's just like, it's been a while since I saw season 1, so I forgot how dope Courtney's fighting style is. It's because it's so unique. No one else has a fighting style like that, because no one else has a literal living staff that kind of operates on its own while also, like, working in combination with your moves. But at the end of it, the place gets smashed up. Mike, Barbara, and Pat coming out like, what's going on? And it's like, they're so calm about the thing, because it's like, right, considering everything we went up against, and it's like, hey, I think this is just a misunderstanding. Pat's like, well, you had a lot of those recently. But that's also the thing of like, why did she break into this place? I'm curious, because obviously we saw early in the episode, the lantern was resonating. So I wonder, did she have the ring the entire time, and she never knew where, the lantern was? Maybe the moment it started reacting, because didn't it do some reacting last season? I know the pink marker or whatever did as well, but I think the lantern, so maybe like she's been looking for it the entire time, and she slowly but surely found her way to Blue Valley to get it. I wonder, was that like, is the ring like a memento of her dad's? I'm like, it's all she has left of her dad, like hide it. Well, because I'm assuming he died just like everyone else during obviously like the JSA getting killed at the beginning of season 1 10 years ago. So I'm curious to find out, her situation and, why now of all times. Like, is it just taking her this long to track them down? Which, speaking of tracking down, Starman, it's like, oh, hi, I also going to need another thing. I'm going to need to find your ex-husband. Which one? The one that likes stripes. I was like, hey! So I'm like, I'm assuming that's supposed to be Mike's mom. That never came up, to my recollection. I could be wrong, but I don't think that came up too much about like Mike's mom / Pat's ex. There was not many conversations about that, so Starman's slowly finding his way, I'm guessing, back to Pat. And, when he does eventually show up, is he going to take the staff back from Courtney? Is he going to let her keep? Like, what's going to happen with all of that? I'll have to wait and see. He's like, once again, because it's like, how are you alive? Like, I mean, we're dealing with the multiverse, so could he be from was he resurrected? Is he actually, like, secretly, like, could it be like he doesn't actually have any memories? Like, maybe he has fragments of memories, and the last thing he remembers is Pat. So maybe, like, the past 10 years, like, he has technically been dead, and him waking up was like, oh, when I died, like, it's like, and I woke up again, it's like, that was, like, just yesterday for me, even though that was 10 years ago. Maybe something in that vein. We'll have to wait and see. But, other than that, we have the return of Cindy, and, going in, doing her thing. It's like, right, assembling her ISA, ripping up Henry's picture, but obviously we see Cameron, Artemis, so, like, she's slowly building out her squad. The one that surprised me was the introduction of Mike. I was like, that's interesting, because I guess it's like, maybe she's going to play into, like, oh, like, you can't be the hero, like, your family's not going to let you, like, run. I mean, would he really sign up with you guys because you're kind of psychopaths? But it's like, I guess it's like you will, like, tug on the whole, like, him wanting to be special because he maybe not wanting to be outshined. Like, Courtney doesn't get to be the only hero. Like, maybe I get to show that I'm powerful in my own right. Or maybe in his mind, it's like, oh, I'm going to infiltrate this group. Very, like, Robin infiltrating and pretending to work with Slade type of thing. Maybe something of a similar vein, as maybe Mike's going to do something similar, like for the Injustice Society. It's just interesting that I think that's going to be an interesting development, because probably getting him on their side will also be like, right, a way to strike against the against Courtney and Pat. Like, maybe that's why also recruiting him, because she knows she can sway him to the dark side, but also, like, it'd be a good weapon against Stargirl and the others. So maybe that's a justification too. But it's definitely going to be interesting with this whole Eclipso thing of, like, once again, it's like the JSA is what it is of the next generation. It's time for the next generation of villains to step up, but that's not all we're going to be dealing with this season, I'm assuming, just because I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see what other heroes and what other villains make their appearances this season. I'm very excited to see what we have in store for this season of Stargirl. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.